Thank you for choosing American Pest CEUs.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Reeves. I'm an associate certified entomologist with American Pest CEUs, and I've been in the pest management industry since 1999. I'll be your instructor for today's course.
This course was prepared by Jack Launius. Ants and their control as part of an integrated pest management plan. Ants and pesticides. Ants can be a large nuisance in houses, warehouses, restaurants, food processing, grocery stores, and just about anywhere else where there is harborage, food, and water. Ants and pesticides. Control failure can come from a variety of problems. Treatment is done incorrectly, species is misidentified, repellent products are used, over-application of products, under-application of products, missing areas of infestation, and much more. One of the important things we like to talk about when we're talking about ants is basic inspection equipment, specimen vials, flashlight, inspection mirror, moisture meter, compressed air, macroscope, and hand lens. These are all great tools when we're looking to find ant activity. All of these things have their purpose. Obviously, you can understand how great a flashlight is. You really can't do a decent inspection at all without a flashlight. But many of you might not think about an inspection mirror. Inspection mirrors can be great because with an inspection mirror, you can look up underneath things, you can look around things. That mirror can illuminate areas that you wouldn't otherwise see. You can also take a flashlight and shine down into the mirror to illuminate areas like up under cupboards, kick plates, things like that. So that's a really great tool that we like. Definitely also think a specimen vial's good. Anytime you're out looking at identifying an insect, a specimen vial can be great because you can save some of the insects, whether it's an ant or whatever it is, bring it back, look at it under a microscope or however you want to magnify it, and then get a better identification. This can even be good to preserve because sometimes you may need somebody else to look at them, so we really like the specimen vials. Now when it comes to tools like a moisture meter, here's another great thing. This is something you normally wouldn't think of. I'm going out to look for ants, no big deal, I'll find their trails, whatever the case may be. But did you know that ants, just like all insects, are attracted to moisture? A moisture meter can be great for you to stick in areas of wood and things like that just to see what the moisture content is. I found that moisture meters can be very handy in pest control inspections all the way around. When you look at a macroscope, you have to remember that these can be helpful in identifying things that can be seen with the naked eye. So, when you have a microscope, obviously you're looking at something that you normally wouldn't be able to see or really wouldn't be able to tell anything. The macroscope just takes something you can already see and makes it bigger and kind of helps you hone in on details. The other thing we have listed here is the hand lens. Once again, this just helps you magnify something. All of these things help out. At the end of the day, identification is everything. Until you identify the ant that you're trying to get rid of, you're really never going to be able to solve the problem. But to identify them, you have to find them, and that's why we like to have some of these tools on our inspections. As we've already mentioned, a thorough inspection is vital in the control of an ant infestation. You need to check any points where electric lines or cable enter the structure. Check for holes in floors, walls, ceilings for electronic cables. Check under appliances. Check in and under cabinets with sinks. Check for snacks that have been hidden in children's rooms. Look for any wall areas that may have elevated moisture. Look for any areas that need to be sealed to exclude entry. There's a lot of great thoughts in the bullet points we just went over. When we look at number 1, checking any points where electric lines or cables enter the structure, I can tell you I was working with a major ant problem in Tennessee years ago. We could not figure out how these Argentine ants were coming in. Finally, after about 5 or 6 of us from the local office coming out and checking it out, we figured out that they were walking along the electric lines. I never would have thought that until I saw it, so that really turned me on to the fact that the one thing you don't look at may be exactly where they're entering a structure. When we talk about checking for holes in floors, walls, ceilings for electronic cables, here again, as you can imagine, any type of cable or electronics, any type of wiring, anything like that, is going to give ants something to trail through. If you think about a studded lumber wall, The drywall sits against the studs, but as you can imagine, the cables are drilled right through the stud. So basically, when somebody runs a cable, they drill a hole through the studs usually to bring the wire through. Or electrical, it doesn't really matter. Either way, it has to go through the studs. My point is that gives the ants something to trail on. It gives them a path, and they're going to take that path. So it's a really good idea to understand when you have any holes where wiring or whatever may have come through, the ants could be coming right through those areas. As far as checking under appliances goes, I think this is a no-brainer. One of the things I've found through the years is moving out appliances like stoves and refrigerators. One covers some interesting things. Most of them are rotted and decaying food or debris that people never would have guessed was there, but a lot of times you will find ants feeding in this area. And we talk a lot about IPM in our courses, and as you can imagine, if you don't handle this type of sanitation, once again, you're really not going to solve the ant problem. So it's always good to move appliances out, have the customer clean up in those areas, and make it part of their habit in the future to keep those areas clean. Another great point here, checking in and under cabinets with sinks. Here's another great one. Anytime you have a sink, you're going to have some moisture issues. It could be a leak, it could be condensation, but as you know, all insects, just like humans or any other living thing, are going to need water to survive. So we definitely want to check these areas. A lot of times you'll get a small pinhole leak in a pipe or something like that, and it'll cause the wood to start to rot. That particle board that the bottom of the cabinets or countertops are made out of. Customers don't always notice this either. It's a really good thing to make them aware with leaks like this, while also understanding that this is providing a good little moisture source for ants and other insects to have harborage. Next, we have another common area to find activity. This is going to be checking for snacks that may have been hidden in children's rooms. Obviously, any of you that have had children understand they're going to take food and they're going to hide it anywhere. They may even leave their backpacks with food hanging out of it or whatever the case may be, or they'll stuff food under their mattress, they'll stuff it in drawers. I mean, kids are going to be kids, as we know. So you got to make sure you find areas like that. Find out where the kids' playroom is. Find out where their bedroom is. Make sure there's not any activity in there. Make sure that the home itself is being kept clean. Some people have different ideas about what clean is. Some parents are going to keep a spotless home. Other ones are just going to let the kids kind of live as they will. But you got to keep in mind that any of these types of foods that are stuffed in any areas, or if there's particles from a meeting in different rooms, this can lead to an ant infestation in an area you never would have looked at otherwise. Our next topic is looking for any wall areas that may have elevated moisture. Once again, we're going to use our moisture meter to do this, but this is another great idea. You may not understand what's going on. It could be a plumbing leak, it could be a leak from the gutters, fascia, the roof, who knows where the leak's coming from. But if you find areas of elevated moisture where there's probably been a leak inside a wall, it's really going to help you find some of those tough ant infestations you wouldn't otherwise uncover. With our last topic on this slide, looking for any areas that need to be sealed to exclude entry, we could probably spend a whole hour on this and just make it its own course. There are so many different areas that we could look at when it comes to exclusion for ants that we could be here all day. I will tell you this, when you're doing a good exterior inspection, it's going to be very important for you to understand to find where the ant trails are coming in at. If you don't look for the trails outside and start finding those areas, you're always going to continue to have problems inside. The biggest part of finding ants is going to be finding them on the outside, finding where they're getting in, and then doing things like caulking up those areas. If you don't spend your time on the inspection looking for them, you're not going to know where to caulk. Caulk, I think, is great. Caulk or silicone, where you find cracks, crevices on the outside of the house that are not even really that big, but you have to keep in mind ants are very small, and it's only going to take a little bit of an area for them to get in. If you give them a quarter of an inch, it's like giving them a mile, as they say. So don't give ants those type of areas to get in as much as possible. Find them on the inspection, seal those areas off, and that'll help you control ants and not worry about the future issues of having problems you can't solve. Again, on this slide, you can see it's common for ants inside a structure to run wiring and plumbing. It's entirely possible for ants to be entering at the opposite end of a house from where you see them coming out. And here again is a light switch cover, and this is a great area where you would probably see ants coming out if you're doing a lot of inspections. Here's some other tips for your clients. Inform your clients too. Store food items that attract ants such as sugar, syrup, honey in sealed containers. Before placing them in sealed containers, remove residues from outer surfaces. Dried dog food is especially attractive to ants. Besides the obvious, placing dried dog food in sealed storage containers, look under anything that has a space under it for signs of loose pieces of dog food. Rinse out empty soft drink containers or remove them from the building. Thoroughly clean up grease and spills. Remove garbage from buildings daily and change liners frequently. As we were talking about earlier, the exterior inspection is very important. Ants are opportunistic by nature and can make a nest just about anywhere depending on the species of ant. When inspecting for ants outdoors, you should look in firewood piles, under yard debris, in in-ground electrical and utility boxes, under and along the siding, wires entering the structure, tree limbs touching the structure, bushes against the structure, under vines or heavy planting that come from the top of a wall, leaking sprinkler heads, gaps, cracks, openings, and protrusions. You also need to look for moisture problems inside and under the structure. As you can see in the photos, there's a lot of different areas to look. We've got some areas in crawl spaces, we've got areas under sinks. There's just so many areas, but just think about anywhere that could be a moisture problem. You definitely need to do a good inspection in that area. Occasionally in your career, you will come across the interior of homes like this. In this instance, we treated where we could and then had a team of housekeepers come in and clean before our next service. Look closely at areas like these. Ants can be going up plant stems and into tiny openings in the structure. And I just want to make one comment on this screen. If you've got this type of growth on the outside of a home, you're not going to be able to caulk and seal up enough areas. Ideally, you would want to get this stuff cut back away from the house because it can be very hard to solve an ant problem under these circumstances. Look for any areas like these that may be harboring ants. Once again, you can see we've got areas of moisture where we've got plants, we've got wet areas where we've got standing water, firewood, and of course mulch and things like that piled up. Definitely are going to be major harborage areas for ants. Ants and pesticides. Ants can be a large nuisance in houses, warehouses, restaurants, food processing, grocery stores, and just about anywhere else there is harborage, food, and water. One thing I want to mention when it comes to talking about ants, I think most people in our industry agree that this is the number one pest nowadays. It doesn't really matter what part of the country or what part of the world you're in, ants are going to be a problem. I think one of the most important things for people to learn as technicians or salespeople, whatever position you're working in the pest control industry, is how to identify and understand the ants in your area. Because depending on your area, you're going to have several different species of ants, and your ability to identify the species in your area and come up with a good plan of control is going to be paramount to your success. Ants and pesticides. Control failure can come from a variety of problems. Treatment is done incorrectly, species is misidentified, repellent products are used, over-application of products, under-application of products, missing areas of infestation, and much more. When we talk about ants and pesticides, Tempo and other highly repellent products can divide ant colonies, force ants into unwanted areas, and trap ants in undesirable areas of a structure. And we're going to talk more about that as we go through this course. One of the worst things you can do with a colonizing insect like ants is put out a repellent product. Once you start scattering them all over a structure and there's no pattern and there's no plan, you're going to have a lot harder time taking care of the colony because, as you're going to learn, repellent products are made to be taken back to the colony to knock out the whole colony up to and including the queen. Ants and pesticides. When the long residual of a pyrethroid is desired, It may be best to apply a bifenthrin spray, since bifenthrin at a low label rate is repellent only to termites and not to ants, according to the manufacturer with regards to Talstar sprays. Ants and pesticides. The best solution for ants is a strategy that involves the use of more than just a simple spray to eliminate them. To kind of set the table for this course, that's exactly what we're going to stress in this course. Just going and hosing down properties for ants, just spray in, nuke them, light the place up, that's the worst way you can go after an ant problem. So we're going to talk about different strategies in this course that are going to be much better and much more effective long term. Ants and pesticides. For new account startup services and regular services, the use of a bait such as Dominant, which is a liquid ant bait containing borax at 5.4% in a sucrose water solution. This product kills and controls sweet-eating ants, contains borax, no offensive odors, can be used indoors and outdoors. Dominant is a liquid ant bait. It attracts and kills all common household ants, including acrobat ants, Argentine ants, big-headed ants, cornfield ants, crazy ants, ghost ants, little black ants, odorous house ants, pavement ants, white-footed ants, and other sweet-feeding ants except farrow, carpenter, fire, and harvest ants. The active ingredient in Dominant is sodium tetraborate, decahydrate borax 5.40%, other ingredients 94.60%. The EPA registration number is 64405-23. This is a keep out of reach of children product. Dilution instructions. 1% dilution. Add 1 part Dominant, liquid ant bait, to 5 parts water, mix thoroughly. 2% solution. Add 1 part Dominant, liquid ant bait, to 2 parts water, mix thoroughly. Bait stations. Add the undiluted 5.4% or the diluted 2% or 1% Dominant liquid ant bait solution into bait stations designed to hold liquid bait. Follow directions included with the bait stations to obtain the best results. On our current chart, you're seeing some different mixing rates for the 1% and 2% dilutions. These are some pretty simple mix rates that can make things easier out in the field. Look at the 1%. We would put 5 ounces of the Dominant plus 25 ounces of water for 1 quart approximately of finished product. At the 1% solution, we could put 20 ounces of Dominant with 100 ounces of water for a finished product of approximately 1 gallon. For a 1% solution, we could also use 1 gallon of Dominant plus 5 gallons of water for a finished product of 6 gallons. At a 2% dilution, we could put 10 ounces of Dominant with 20 ounces of water for approximately a 1 quart finished product. We could also do 42 ounces at a 2% dilution rate mixed with 84 ounces of water for approximately a 1 gallon of finished product. Also under a 2% dilution, we could use 1 gallon of Dominant plus 2 gallons of water for a finished product of 3 gallons. With Dominant 1% liquid ant bait, our active ingredient is sodium tetraborate, decahydrate borax 1.0%, and other ingredients 99%. Attracts and kills all common household ants, including, except farrow, carpenter, fire, and harvester ants, acrobat ants, Argentine ants, big-headed ants, cornfield ants, crazy ants, ghost ants, little black ants, odorous house ants, pavement ants, white-footed ants, and other sweet-feeding ants. Bait stations. Add Dominant 1% liquid ant bait solution into bait stations designed to hold liquid bait. Follow directions included with the bait stations to obtain best results. Ants and pesticides. Baiting technique and placement. It is important not to disrupt ant foraging trails when placing refillable containers in infested areas where ants are active. Place containers adjacent to foraging trails. depending on level of ant intrusion, allows containers to remain in areas up to 24 hours after initial placement. Once discovered, ants will change course and route a new foraging trail to the bait. If the bait is completely consumed within 24 hours after initial placement, refill containers are placed in a new station in the same proximity. Ants and pesticides. Borax is a slower acting insecticide. Thus, once feeding begins, it will take approximately 24 hours for the toxicant to be distributed throughout the colony, reaching the reproductives. Numbers of foraging ants will decrease, only stragglers will remain prior to elimination. We're getting some good information from the label here because we're going to see that within about 24 hours the toxicant will be distributed throughout the reaching the reproductives. Then the numbers of ants will decrease and only the stragglers will remain prior to elimination. The reason why I say this is important because a lot of times our clients ask us, when am I going to see a difference? How long is this going to take? So I really like when we're looking at products and they tell us on the label what the expectations are, and then we pass that on to our clients. Ants and pesticides. Bait should not be contaminated with other chemical compounds, as insecticidal and non-insecticidal compounds can inhibit the effectiveness of dominant. If other chemical compounds have been applied previously, avoid placing dominant on those treated areas. Use dominant in conjunction with such applications by placing in remaining untreated areas in cracks and crevices. Outside baiting. Fill larger containers with dominant and place near the colony. Make sure containers are accessible without physical hindrance. Proper ant stations have multiple openings and surface groves. Some species exist in such high numbers that multiple stations will be needed and will also have to be refilled. Refilling with fresh bait will rejuvenate the feeding and foraging activity of ants. After placement and refilling of stations, monitor every 24 hours. Ants and pesticides. Outside dust such as Nibor-D and other dust should be used in moderation and not broadcasted so as to create an issue with their repellency. In cases where their use may pose a threat to control, they should not be used. Ants and pesticides. Niban will control ants, Argentine, carpenter, thief, pharaoh, little black, pavement, odorous house, and crazy ants. Ants and pesticides. Exterior applications. Apply bait evenly at the rate of 2 to 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Treat exterior perimeter areas of structure in a band 2 to 4 feet wide. Also, apply in a 2 to 4 foot band around all trees, stumps, and firewood piles. Scatter bathe in other localized sites. Reapply as necessary. If any ant nests are located, apply 1/2 to 1 ounce of product directly to the area. Ants and pesticides. Niban FG is perfect for perimeter, attic, and crawl space treatments, as well as difficult to reach areas like cracks and crevices, under cabinets and appliances, in and around waste containers, and into openings around drains, water pipes, and electrical conduits. The active ingredient in Niban FG is a 5% boric acid. Each granule carries patented insect food attractants and food-grade oils to give the bait not only excellent insect attraction and efficacy, but also long-term protection against moisture and spoilage. Ants and pesticides. Application instructions. Exterior applications. Apply bait evenly at the rate of 2 to 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Treat exterior perimeter areas of the structure in a band 2 to 4 feet wide. Also apply a product in a 2 to 4 foot band around all trees, stumps, and firewood piles. Scatter bait in other localized sites. Reapply as necessary. If any ant nests are located, apply 1/2 to 1 ounce of product directly to the area. Ants and pesticides. Niban FG. Interior applications. Apply only in areas inaccessible to children and pets. Avoid contamination of feed and foodstuffs. This product may be applied to cracks and crevices where insects may hide. Apply by scattering and dusting under and behind refrigerators, coolers, stoves, sinks, dishwashers, washing machines, dryer tubs, cabinet voids, and counters. Apply as needed into openings around drains, water pipes, and electrical conduits, and in cracks and crevices along baseboards and corners of cabinets, countertops, cupboards, and closets. Ants and pesticides. Interior treatments are done in several different ways with techniques and styles that are easily combined. If liquid applications are required, use non-repellent products. Liquid pesticides are best applied as a crack and crevice treatment, as shown on the screen. What you're seeing on the screen is an attachment crack and crevice tool that can be attached to a B&G type of sprayer. This can be really helpful because in reality most technicians try to just with the B&G on Penstream and they end up getting a ton of overspray and they don't really get the product in the crack and crevice where they need to. I highly suggest looking at tools like this crack and crevice adapter to avoid those situations. Ants and pesticides. The targeted application of dust and gel baits in addition to crack and crevice treatments ensures a higher level of control. Ants and pesticides. In some cases, the use of dust and baits alone can be effective. Baits can be used in areas along trails, but a good rule is to use them close to the ground or an ant entry point. When thinking about this with ants and pesticides, this will slow the ants from climbing up the walls or into other areas, making them less of an eyesore. The reverse, however, by ant baiting along ceilings will force the ants to trail up walls and other items to reach the bait. And if any of you have ever been through this, your customers never like when you pull ants up into areas where they're going to see them. That's why we're saying bait down lower, bait in their entry points, keep them out of sight where they're more so out of mind for your client while the product's doing what it needs to do. Ant species and techniques. When we talk about ant species and techniques, the center section of an ant's body that separates the abdomen from the thorax is referred to as the pedestal. The pedestal has either one or two nodes that protrude from the top of it. And as you're going to find out as we go deeper into this subject, looking at the number of pedestals is going to be one of the easier ways to identify the species of ant. It's definitely not the only way, but it's one of the ways that I kind of like to use because it really helps you know if it's a one-node or a two-node pedestal ant, what species are a possibility, and helps you eliminate the ones that aren't. Ant species and techniques. Ants can be separated into two primary types with other classifications, grouping them into more complex subgroups. The center section of an ant's body that separates the abdomen from the thorax is referred to as the pedestal. The pedestal has either one or two nodes that protrude from the top of it. Most structure-infesting ants will have one node, with the exception of a few two-node ant species. Our first one-node ant is going to be the Argentine ant. Ant species and techniques. Argentine ants are the most common species found in Southern California and other areas of moderate weather in the western part of the United States. They have large colonies that intermingle with other colonies on the property, allowing for the sharing of resources. When looking further at one-node Argentine ants, control of these ants can be difficult because the large superconnected colonies will infest the inside of the house, connected to several different queens outside, with most of the colonies still out in the yard. One-node Argentine ants. Control of these ants can be difficult because the large superconnected colonies will infest the inside of the house, connected to several different queens outside, with most of the colonies still out in the yard. Argentine ant controls should be well thought out before the treatment begins, and the property prepared with the customer's cooperation. With one-node Argentine ants, lawn watering should be adjusted to alter the property in manner that lowers ant intrusion into the structure. When a lawn is too wet, ants can be pushed inside. When a lawn is too dry, ants will come inside looking for water. One-node Argentine ants. As the seasons change, lawn watering should be adjusted to match. Likewise, the treatment should change throughout the year to match the changes in ant colonies' behavior and relative size. This is very important. As we know, at different times of the year, you can get more or less rain, and that's going to affect the cycle of what you need to do when it comes to lawn watering. Where I live in Florida, we have rainy season from about May through October. It definitely is not going to make sense to have your sprinklers putting out the same amount of water as it would in, say, March, where we don't get much rain at all. Keep in mind that having excess water on the property over and over is really something that's going to draw in more ants, most likely. On one note, Argentine ants, when starting an ant service in the summer, lowering the ant population is the priority, but a treatment in the spring also involves limiting reproduction rates. As Argentine ants are killed by pesticides, issues associated with their control arise from their ability to quickly replace lost workers. With one-node Argentine ants, therefore control in the months where their reproduction is high can be greatly increased by the use of abamectin-based baits outside. Continuing on one-node Argentine ants, you have to remember when starting an ant service in the summer, lowering the ant population is the priority, but a treatment in the spring also involves limiting reproduction rates. The opposite is true in the winter, however. Ants do little foraging, therefore they wouldn't take very much, if any, back to the nest. And if they did, it would have little effect since their rates of reproduction are much lower. With one-node Argentine ants, as the seasons change, Argentine ants can be found in most areas outside, but the bulk of the population tends to change locations with the changing weather. When it comes to one-node Argentine ants, in the cold months, Argentine ants will move the colonies closer to the structure, and as it starts to get warm, ants move more out into the yard, and by summer most ants can be found everywhere on a property, from the house to the fence line. Again, with one-node Argentine ants, overwatering or underwatering lawns creates similar issues with too much water constantly forcing ants out of the ground, and not enough water creates a need that must be met either by foraging from fountains, pools, leaking sprinklers, or even heading inside of the home. Further, with one-node Argentine ants tend to be more of an outside pest, therefore a majority of their control is done from the outside. Most of the colony will be outside of the house with a colony type that almost never moves a colony inside. In my mind, this is an excellent point. When it comes to the Argentine ants, you really need to find out where the colonies are and where they're trailing from. They can be one of the hardest ants to control because their colonies are so large, so make sure you start searching out the source, finding where the colonies are, and then getting your products, your baits, things like that in the areas that they're going to pick it up and take it back to the colony. Because if you don't do the legwork on this, you're going to have a hard time getting rid of Argentine ants because they're really not going to be nesting indoors, and a lot of your control is going to take place outside. With one-node Argentine ants, with the external nature of the colony's existence and only about 3% of the ant population ever leaving the nest, the foundation treatment outside becomes a large part of their control and prevention. To close out some of my thoughts on the Argentine ants, the foundation treatment can be very important as well as the baiting and the other things further away from the home. I've found that sometimes you need layers of products to really control Argentine ants, because the reality is it seems like they keep coming in waves. So don't be afraid to use multiple products on the Argentine ants, as well as doing a foundation treatment as part of that. With one-node Argentine ants, repellent products are an ill-advised solution, and outside baits become a very important piece to the complete control plan. Our next one-node ant is going to be the odorous house ant, as shown in the photo here. I'll give you just a moment to review this. One-node odorous house ants. Odorous house ants are closely related to Argentine ants, but their control is much more complicated. They can and often do nest inside of walls, shiplap ceilings, and other interior areas. This makes their control very difficult since the source of infestation is usually in inaccessible areas. With one-node odorous house ants, this behavioral trait, referred to as budding, makes it even harder to control them since a lost queen won't collapse, the colony and lost workers are quickly replenished. A little further with the one-node odorous house ants, Seeking out and finding colonies whenever possible should be a priority when trying to control or eradicate them. I just want to make a point on the recurring theme you're seeing here. Seeking out the colonies and finding them is always going to be a good way to control ants. Now, there may be some species that are a little bit different, but the point of what I'm saying is if you can seek out and find the colonies, it's going to make your control efforts that much easier. When it comes to one-node odorous house ants, wall voids with a known or suspected colony can be treated with a foam machine and an appropriate non-repellent pesticide. Nibor-D applied as a dry foam applications can be used when better adhesion to treated surfaces and minimal runoff is desired. Residual effects of Nibor-D will last longer in areas protected from weather and elements. It is effective as both a preventative and a remedial treatment to kill and control ants, including Argentine, thief, little black, pavement, odorous house, crazy, and ghost ants. Preparation of a Nibor-D foam solution. To create a dry consistency foam, add a surfactant, foaming agent, and a Nibor-D liquid solution into foaming application equipment. Generally 1 to 2 ounces of a foaming agent will create dry foam with the desired expansion ratio of 20 to 1. Refer to the foaming equipment manufacturer's manuals and the surfactant labels for additional instructions. Wash and rinse all equipment after each use. ProFoam Platinum is a unique blend of foaming agents offering treatment capabilities by transporting all types of products to remote areas such as wall voids, ground voids, drains, and other voids needing complete treatment of all surface areas. This product can be added to soil termiticides, borates, or drain cleaning agents to create a foam for treatment requirements. Not Prop 65 listed in California. The highest quality foam, labeled for broad use, compatible with all insecticides tested on the market. pH balance with a non-repellent and non-ionic formula, less corrosive than ionic formulas on the market. A little more on one-node odorous house ants. Wall voids with a known or suspected colony can be treated with a foam machine and an appropriate non-repellent pesticides. Dust should never be used for these ants because the dust acts as a repellent and force ants into other areas of the structure. Likewise, repellent pesticides such as pyrethrum will also cause colonies to move or divide. More on one-node odorous house ants. While the use of insect growth regulators seems appropriate and would logically slow budding, their use is not recommended. Nigard, which would seem to be adequate, acts as a repellent to odorous house ants and in many cases causes more issues than it resolves. The best process for control is the use of crack and crevice treatments in infested areas and localized gel bait placements. With one-node odorous house ants, can be easily distinguished from other closely related ant species because of their potent odor when crushed. The smell is said to resemble rotten coconut. With one-node odorous house ants, when you put them under a microscope, more obvious visual cues can be noted. They have the same globular anus as other closely related ant species. The spike node on their abdomen is usually hidden against the thorax, whereas it can be easily seen in the other closely related species. With one-node odorous house ants, they swarm with flying alates, leaving the nest around the late spring. The swarmers do not have the obvious smell when crushed, therefore when looking at flying ants, the smell cannot be used as a factor for species determination. Our next ant is going to be the one-node carpenter ant. I'll give you a few moments to review the image. One-node carpenter ants. Carpenter ants are a common type of ant that is divided into many different subspecies. Of those subspecies, only a few infest homes typically. Carpenter ants typically live in trees where they create hollow cavities in wood to make their nest and satellite colonies. With one-node carpenter ants, these satellite colonies, however, can sometimes be found in the structural and non-structural lumber of homes. One point I think is important to make here, In some states, carpenter ants are considered a wood-destroying organism, and others are not. So make sure you understand the state laws when you're doing any type of treatments to understand if carpenter ants are considered a wood-destroying organism in your state. When looking at one-node carpenter ants, a key sign of infestation is the frass that can be found in areas of infestation. Found among the wood shavings from the ant colony many times are ant heads and other leftover body parts. These parts are discarded from the colony and can be easily distinguished from termite droppings, which are smooth, with evenly sized and exactly shaped fragments. Looking further at one-node carpenter ants workers are polymorphic, which means that they can be found in different sizes. Likewise, they have a globular anus, which separates them from several other species of ant. With one-node carpenter ants, under a microscope, a ring of yellow hairs can be noted at the end of their abdomen. They have no stingers, but in many cases are large enough to bite. Looking at control of one-node carpenter ants, their control inside of a house may involve injecting galleries, where satellite colonies are located, treating the outside perimeter, outside trees, and locally treating inside hotspots. There's a lot of different ways you can go on the treatment. I'm from the old school years ago, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, where we would drill from the inside of the exterior walls of a home, and we would actually put Ficam D-dust between every set of studs. So basically, in essence, we were putting dust in the wall voids. Nowadays, there's a lot of different treatments you can do. They're going to be much, much different, especially with the advancement of non-repellent products and baits. Continuing with one-node carpenter ants, some products are Niban. Treat exterior perimeter areas of the structure in a band 2 to 4 feet wide at a rate of 6 ounces per 100 square feet. Also apply product in a 2 to 4 foot band around all trees, stumps, firewood piles, and other locations where carpenter ants may nest. If the nest is located in a hollow tree or stump, apply 1/2 to 1 ounce of product directly into the cavity. Apply along ant trails and in areas where ant activity has been noted. As we talk more about one-node carpenter ants and some products we can use on them, again sticking with Niban, FG this time, exterior applications. Apply bait evenly at the rate of 2 to 4 pounds per 1,000 square feet. Treat exterior perimeter areas of structure in band 2 to 4 feet wide. Also, apply product in a 2 to 4 foot band around all trees, stumps, and firewood piles. Scatter bait in other localized areas. Reapply as necessary. If ant nests are located, apply 1/2 to 1 ounce of product directly to the area. With one-node carpenter ants, some other products are advanced granular carpenter ant bait. This is a ready-to-use product for use in controlling numerous ants, both indoors and outdoors. This bait formulation combines a mixture of foods and the delayed-action insecticide abamectin. This insecticide acts to reduce the population of worker ants and can cause an immediate halt in egg production, resulting in colony elimination. In order to ensure access to bait, avoid the use of repellent insecticides or sprays on or near this product. Non-repellent insecticides such as dinotefuran, chlorphenapir, and fipronil may be used in conjunction with this product. Broadcast application. Use this product at a rate of 1 pound per acre. This is equivalent to approximately 1.8 ounces per 5,000 square feet or 0.4 ounces per 1,000 square feet. 1 tablespoon equals approximately 0.3 ounce of bait. Apply the product as uniformly as possible. Around structures, lightly sprinkle evenly at a rate of 0.3 ounces per 100 linear feet in a band approximately 1 to 2 feet wide around the foundation of the building. Treat visible trails with approximately 1 ounce of product. With one-node carpenter ants and integrated pest management practices include the trimming of trees that are touching the house and removing dead trees from the property. These IPM measures are a necessity in many cases and can be the difference between long-term control and small, even unnoticeable changes. Our next one-node ant is going to be the velvety tree ant. I'll give you a few moments to review the image. With the one-node velvety tree ants were traditionally found in rural places and were not a typical problem within structures. However, velvety tree ants are becoming more common in urban environments. A little more on one-node velvety tree ants. They do not prefer the inside of a house. In fact, most inside infestations clear up on their own without any treatment. Outside, they can be found under bark mulch, all over trees, and in dead logs. With one-node velvety tree ants, when crushed, they have a similar odor to odorous house ants. Their bodies have an obvious change in color between the abdomen and the thorax, with the pedicel usually an orange color. The abdomen itself has small hairs on top that resemble velvet, which is why it has the name that it does. The abdomen therefore has a velvety appearance. When it comes to control of one-node velvety tree ants, products with a dual mode of action such as temperate or Bithor SC are most appropriate, and with cases such as heavy bark mulch, these products can be broadcasted with the use of a power sprayer. More on treatments of one-node velvety tree ants. Treatment should not just focus on the ants themselves, but should include the use of systemic insecticides that kill honeydew-producing insects, since they are the primary food source of this species. More on treatments of one-node velvety tree ants. The temperate label allows for its use at a lower rate than what is listed, and cutting it down to a rate of 0.375, which is 4 milliliters per gallon, is appropriate. Continuing on treatments of one-node velvety tree ants, because the treatment involves soaking the area, when the water evaporates, a similar amount of pesticide will be left on the ground as if the area were treated using a backpack sprayer at a higher rate. Sticking with treatments of one-node velvety tree ants, however, the treatment will penetrate deep into areas of mulch and ground cover as a result of the heavy spray and large amount of water used by comparison. Abamectin-based baits and boron-based baits such as Niban make the job complete when applying them outside as needed. Let's take a look at our first two-node ant, which is going to be the fire ant. I'll give you a few moments to review this image. With two-node fire ants, in rare cases with fire ants, colonies and reproductives can be found inside of wall voids with accumulated water, flooded basements, and areas of water damage. In many cases, roof leaks and damaged plumbing are discovered after a swarm of ants flies from the area. More on two-node fire ants. Outside control is done by treating mounds individually, then applying a general perimeter spray, followed by the application of baits. Many companies make special fire ant baits, but advanced 375A and Niban G baits are appropriate. More on two-node fire ants. The granules of Niban FG are generally considered too small for these larger ants, with the exception of southern fire ants, which are smaller, and a few other species that feed on smaller granules. More on two-node fire ants. Fire ant workers usually have two rounded nodes on their pedicel, and they have stingers. The red imported fire ant is red, as the name suggests, and very large compared to other ant species. When looking at two-node fire ants, the southern fire ant is much smaller, with the head and thorax red to brown and the abdomen mostly black. With two-node fire ants and harvester ants, many of the ant species with two nodes have similar characteristics with the exception of a few. In the case of many species such as fire ants and harvester ants prefer to be outside. Let's take a look at our second two-node ant, the harvester ant. I'll give you a few moments to review the image. With two-node harvester ants, it can be said they have beards, as you can see with the arrow on the image. More on two-node fire ants and harvester ants. Harvester ants are like red imported fire ants and also large, but can easily be distinguished from them by noting the hairs on the underside of the ant workers' heads. Let's take a look at Advion fire ant bait. This product is for the control of imported fire ants, big-headed ants, pavement ants, and turfgrass ants on lawns, recreational areas, golf courses, and fenced pastures grazed by horses and other companion animals. For the control of imported fire ants in commercial nursery production of field and container-grown ornamentals and non-bearing fruit and nut trees and turfgrass sod on sod farms. Active ingredient is going to be indoxacarb, 0.045%, other ingredients, 99.95%. Advion Fire Ant Bait is a ready-to-use granular bait containing 0.00045 pounds indoxacarb per 1 pound of product. Let's take a look at another two-note ant, the pharaoh ant. I'll give you a few moments to review this image. Looking at two-note pharaoh ants are a lot like odorous house ants with how they are controlled, but aren't as easily moved from place to place. They are also much smaller than most other ant species, with a relatively small size of around 2 millimeters in length. They have stingers but don't use them. Again, looking at two-note pharaoh ants, budding is normal with this species, and they can have several hundred reproductives per colony, but growth regulators can and should be used on them to limit reproduction. Pharaoh ants can nest in walls and prefer to nest especially close to water sources. With two-note pharaoh ants, areas behind baseboards and bathrooms where humidity might make an area attractive are common nest locations, but also in wall voids and even inside of furniture. Inside of houses, they prefer warm, humid conditions, 80 to 86 degrees, and 80% humidity. More on two-note pharaoh ants. Like with odorous house ants, the use of repellent pesticides increases the likelihood of treatment failure. Treatment should always be done with non-repellent pesticides and selective applications of baits and dust. Again, with two-note pharaoh ants, repellent pesticides can force ants to go into hiding where colonies are moved and return as a much larger colony or even multiple colonies in reaction to the repellency. The bottom line of what we're saying here is you definitely do not ever want to use a repellent product on pharaoh ants. Once you start to spread them and scatter them, you're going to have a big mess on your hands. I can't tell you how many times I've seen companies use repellent in residential structures and commercial structures like hospitals where they can be very common and have spread them all over the building. It can take several months to get a problem under control at that point for all the reasons we just talked about, where they split their colonies and even have the multiple colonies throughout the structure. Again, looking at two-note pharaoh ants, exterior treatment should not be overlooked and in many cases may be required. These ants can nest outside close to the house and can sometimes be found under weed covers with workers foraging the adjacent rooms. Let's talk a little about IPM strategies for ants. Integrated pest management strategies. First and foremost, ant behavior varies depending on moisture. Overwatered lawns and underwatered lawns are of concern for many species of ants. With integrated pest management strategies, you need to look at things like leaking pipes, roof leaks, and any moisture-related structural defect that can lead to problems relating to any ant species. So anytime you're dealing with one of these structural defects, you have to have a plan in place. Most of the time, pest control companies are not going to be able to solve these. This is where the customer communication and cooperation works hand in hand with your service. So make sure you find these conducive conditions, but also make sure you have a plan to solve them by working with the customer and or maybe even some referral partner vendors that can help you take care of some of these bigger problems outside of your scope of work. More on integrated pest management strategies. Proper lawn watering is very important. However, in many cases, homeowners prefer the simple, incorrect idea of the more water the better. This oftentimes forces ant colonies close to the foundation and possibly inside of the house. With integrated pest management strategies, water is such an offense to ants that in many cases, ants can be seen carrying eggs as they leave an area just saturated. Again, with integrated pest management strategies, Ants will quite often enter homes as a result of overwatering outside, but likewise a lawn that is too dry will also force ants inside. Again, on the topic of integrated pest management strategies, it is often seen on the driest days of the year when ants scour the inside of a structure in search of what's missing outside: water. With integrated pest management strategies, gaps and cracks that can provide ant entry should be sealed when possible, while weep holes around windows should be treated with an appropriate pesticide product. Other cracks and gaps around window frames can be sealed with appropriate caulking. Also, with integrated pest management strategies, cracks in brick and concrete can be treated, but for long-term control, those gaps and cracks should be sealed. With integrated pest management strategies, on the inside of a structure, countertops should be sealed along joints and gaps, with particular attention around sinks and toilets for areas that water or other wetness may accumulate. With integrated pest management strategies, particular attention should be paid to any recurring issue that ants seem attracted to. If any ant problem continues with ants returning to a dripping faucet or a continuous food source such as dishes in the sink, those conducive conditions should be corrected immediately. Care should be taken on all ant inspections to find these issues and teach your client how to correct the issues. Finally, to round out integrated pest management strategies, dripping sprinklers, spilled food in cupboards, loose candy stashes, and many other things can contribute to an ongoing ant infestation. In many houses, things fall behind refrigerators, stoves, and other items that do not get moved regularly. Checking and cleaning these areas are always a necessity. Treating these areas may also be appropriate, but not always necessary. Photos in this course are courtesy of photographers published on bugwood.org ITP Node. Congratulations, you have completed the course. Please proceed to the 20-question quiz. Please drop us a line and give us your comments on the course, pestceus@gmail.com.